President Trump has declared Liberation Day, promising a return to the golden age for the United States and new tariffs. He's confirmed an executive order for reciprocal tariffs, suggesting that if other countries impose tariffs on the US will respond in kind. Donald Trump also slapping new tariffs on Australia, effective immediately. Government sources say they're expecting 10% on all Australian exports. Here's part of that announcement.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple. Can't get any simpler than that.
All right, let's get into this. For more, we're joined by Chris Berg, Professor at RMIT. Great to see you. A really big announcement. What's your initial thoughts?
Look, it is a shockingly large announcement. Some of the tariffs that have been imposed on countries like China, Vietnam are extraordinarily high. I think these tariffs are going to have really significant impacts, obviously, for American consumers, for global trade, but also for geopolitics as well. This is going to be a really important moment in global economic history, I think, and I'm quite worried about the uncertainty to the global economy it will bring about.
It isn't a surprise. He said he would do this through the campaign ever since the announcement of 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, which he then pulled back. But we saw massive market reaction and governments around the world starting to panic. Were they right?
It absolutely wasn't a surprise that there were going to be tariffs. I think it is genuinely surprising that the tariffs are going to be so high, so broad, and so dramatic. Donald Trump does have a habit of overstating. I think people have gotten used to, or thought they had gotten used to, and understood his perspectives about tariffs and about other public policy matters as well. But in this particular case, putting extraordinarily high tariffs on some of America's most important trading partners, as well as the uncertainty that the up and down tariffs have had for the last couple of months since he entered the White House, I think this is going to have some really significant impact. I'd also like to point out as well that these tariffs may not be the end of it. Donald Trump likes to do deals, he likes to do bargains, so even the uncertainty hasn't necessarily been cleared off by the announcement of this tariff.
Let's talk about the Australian side. He singled out Australia during his speech, saying Australians are great people, but we bring their beef in, but Australians have a tariff on our beef as well. Talk to us about the impact that we'll see on tariffs impacting Australian exports to the US.
So as far as we can see, every country has at least a 10% tariff, and we've gotten a 10% tariff as well. As you mentioned, he specifically identified Australia's failure to accept US beef imports, so bringing beef from the US into Australia as a violation of our trading partnership. Now, we prevent those beef imports for biosecurity reasons. You could make an argument that there is a protectionist intent behind some of those biosecurity, but having said that, we have been negotiating those beef import restrictions ever since we had a US-Australia free trade agreement. This is a well-known thing. I'm sure that the Australian government would be very happy to negotiate with it. But Australia has one of the most open trade regimes. It's either, depending on how you measure it, it's either the most open trade regime in the world or the third most open trade regime in the world. That's something we should be very proud of. And the fact that we are being slapped with reciprocal tariffs, I think, is frankly absurd. It's going to harm American consumers more than it's going to harm Australians, but it's going to harm us both nonetheless.
We are at the start, but nevertheless in the midst of an election campaign, a battle between two ideological points about what Australia should be. But on the issue of Donald Trump, both Peter Dutton and the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese seem to have a very common theme in terms of handling him. What do you think they will do about these tariffs? Would one of them be wise to retaliate against US tariffs? And given it's only 10%, not the 20 or 25% that many had been worried about, that kind of rallying behind the Prime Minister that we're seeing with Mark Carney in Canada, getting him level in the polls, and many pundits in Australia predicting that Trump attacking Australia will help Anthony Albanese. What are your thoughts there?
Look, it's a great question. So the 10% tariff, we haven't been targeted, not just for high tariffs, but we haven't been targeted in the same way that Canada has been. All the jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state, that's become incredibly, well, not even divisive in Canada, it's become incredibly unifying for Canadian politics. On the other hand, Donald Trump has actually had mostly good words to say about us, even though he's obviously aggrieved with some of our public policy settings. So I don't expect that it's going to be as challenging an issue in this election campaign. Both sides of politics in Australia have said that they don't intend to impose reciprocal tariffs on the United States. That is absolutely the right move. It's the right move, I think, from a geopolitical perspective, but as an Australian consumer, as the viewers of this show, as Australian consumers, that's fantastic for us. We do not want to be putting additional taxes on Australian consumers in order to punish our closest trading partner. I think that would be a real mistake. And I'm very glad that there is bipartisan agreement that even if the US is going a different direction, Australia needs to remain a free trade driven country.
Do you think the world will remain a free trade driven world? Do you think that all of the efforts that we've seen for free trade agreements, the WTO over the last 20, 30 years, bringing in more nations, do you think that starts to be unwound by this? Or do you think that the US is an anomaly that will see cavalcade after cavalcade of cars, a procession of different leaders heading to the White House to say, we will drop our tariffs on US so that we can get out of this? Which way do you think it will go?
Yeah, look, frankly, I'm pessimistic. I think the reaction of other jurisdictions like the European Union, unfortunately like Canada, we've seen a lot of countries raise tariffs and use tariffs as a weapon, a geopolitical weapon against their closest allies. I'm glad Australia is not playing that game, but I am pessimistic for the future of global free trade at this stage. It could well change. I think there's really dark economic, we could be facing a very dark economic horizon, particularly in the United States, if that causes the Trump administration to about face and return to the US free trade principles. I hope that's the case, but at the moment it's pretty pessimistic.
Is Donald Trump right though? Has the US been ripped off by even its friends?
I think that we have been punishing some US firms, particularly around digital, big US tech firms. I think there's a strong case to be made that we've been regulating American firms in a way that's harmful for both those firms and Australian consumers. But I think most of what he identifies as being ripped off, the US being ripped off by its trading partners, are actually just expressions of trade. He talks a lot about the trade deficit, but they get US dollars for everything that they export, and you have to, in a trading relationship, you have to spend money to buy goods and send money out when you want to send those goods out as well. These are reciprocal trading agreements. Every trade is a free exchange. So I don't think he's right in the general points. I think there are some quite specific points that he is correct about, but generally speaking, the US is not ripped off by trade. Consumers benefit from trade.
Chris Berg, Professor at RMIT, appreciate your time here on Ticker. Thank you.
Thank you so much.